I kept asking my doctors before I would leave, I would literally just beg for a referral. Like, if there's some specialist, somebody, just something, please. Finally, this medical study comes. They wheel me in my wheelchair to the study, and I'm laying there thinking about all the things that I'm going to do. And the doctor, he comes in and he's got this look on his face, and he just looks at me and he says, Miss Gilmore, you actually can't be a part of the study. We don't really expect you're going to heal.
I have a great show for you today. I have Brandy Gillmore talking about how to identify emotional patterns and to help to use those to transmute pain, to release pain, to heal your body in ways that you may find really surprising, really compelling. Brandy has a brand new book out that she wrote called Master Your Mind and Energy to Heal Your Body. And she just had a research paper published. And she also uses thermal imaging where you can see, demonstrate that her techniques work in real time. You're dealing with complex chronic illness, pain, and you've exhausted a lot of physical healing modalities, and you're looking for something else. You're looking kind of for that next level of, healing your body. Then tune in to this show. It's really, really good. So our guest today, Brandy Gillmore, you can learn more about her work at brandygillmore.com. Brandy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Wendy, it is so wonderful to connect with you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I love this topic that we're going to discuss today, which is using the power of your mind to heal your body. And so why don't you tell us your story? What kind of got you into this modality of healing? And also that propelled you to write your book as well, that we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Absolutely. I have to say, this is literally the last thing I ever thought I would be doing. You could have told me I would be an astronaut, and I might have believed that more than what I'm doing today. But basically, I used to do network engineering and operations, and then I had an accident, and technically two. I had a car accident and a fall accident. And I fell just right, just wrong, however you want to say it. But I literally went from living a full life to being injured, wheelchair walker, cane, on morphine every day, and a complete mess. And my doctor said that there was no hope for recovery. There was nothing else they could do.
I hate that when doctors tell people that. No, that's maybe their experience, but there's so much that one can do.
There is, and, especially, so I've healed myself about over 10 years ago now. And so my injury was April of 2003, but yeah, they basically, they kept saying, there's nothing else they can do. And at the time I was very much into allopathic medicine. And so I was, well, there's got to be something else, some other nerve ablation, some other infusion, some other injection, some other surgery, some other something. And they just kept saying, there's nothing else we can do. I even got into this medical study, because when I kept asking my doctors before I would leave, I would literally just beg for a referral. Like, if there's some specialist, somebody, just something, please. And so finally they got me into this medical trial study. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is it. You hope that something new is going to be discovered. And so in this medical study, leading up to it, I thought, I felt like a kid waiting for Christmas. Like, you count down the days. And so finally this medical study comes. They wheel me in my wheelchair to the study, and I'm laying there thinking about all the things that I'm going to do. And the doctor, he comes in and he's got this look on his face, and he just looks at me and he says, Miss Gilmore, you actually can't be a part of the study. We don't really expect you're going to heal. And I was crushed. I was so crushed. But what came from it was actually really profound. And it was that, basically I got to a point where I didn't even want to open my eyes. I was just like, what's the point? And then I had this thought or epiphany that came into my mind and said, well, what about the placebo? We know that there's a certain percentage of people in a study who could get results from the placebo. And it opened the door to understanding the mind and energy and neuroscience and how it works and how to get results. And it just became a life-changing gift.
Yeah. And so tell us about that. What was your next step? So what in that, I know that you're like, no, there has to be a way. And we know the placebo effect is if you believe that you're going to get better, that you will get better. And so what was the next step for you?
Well, I took a whole bunch of wrong steps. I did everything wrong. And then started learning from it. For example, a lot of people think that the placebo does work because of belief. And so then I was convincing myself to believe that I was already healed. And it wasn't working. And I was doing it for years and it wasn't working. And then I found something called the open label placebo, which is exactly like it sounds. It's open label. So both the doctor and the patient both know it's a fake pill and it still works. And so like, okay, well, clearly belief is not the answer here. There's got to be something else. And so, long story short, I had like all of these epiphanies along the way because I had been trying the diet and the supplements and that wasn't working. So then I was like meditation and theta state and binaural beats and phantom phase frequencies and all of these things. And that wasn't working. And so I started having all these epiphanies about what I was doing that wasn't working and why it wasn't working. And then I also started to find things that made logical sense. That, for example, like there are just anomalies that blew my mind. Like people with multiple personality disorder can have different ailments when they're in different personalities. There's even like a case of a study of a woman who was a well-known case who was blind in some personalities, but not others. And so everything really started pointing to the mind, and that it became this unfoldment of figuring out, okay, how does it work? And how do I just get results? And so it's just this whole journey of understanding.
In your book, you talk about emotion control consciousness. Can you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So as I started looking at MPD, my multiple personality disorder, I started looking at understanding how emotions affect our energy, affect the body. And so I really delved into understanding how emotions can influence our energy and can influence our health. And so I got to a point where I said, okay, well, I have to create a radical shift in emotions. And what I started realizing is that, we hear about, okay, well, stress affects the body and let's relieve stress and all of these things. But what I began to realize is when I really want to implement it and understand how to apply it, it wasn't just as easy as just like, well, shift your emotions. And so I started realizing all of these awarenesses regarding patterns and how it works. And the simple way to think about emotion controlled consciousness or emotion controlled perception is that, if we've ever been like, if you've ever been in love before, where you're so in love and all you can see is the good in somebody, right? But have you ever done that? Like, I think most people have done this, where they're so angry and they just, or they just had an argument and they just keep fault finding the person, or they get sucked back into the argument, right? It's like your mind automatically keeps going back to the argument. And so what I began to realize is that how we feel emotionally shapes our perception. And so if we're in fear, we see everything that's fearful. If we're in love, we see everything, we see the best in the person. If we've had an argument or negative, we see all of that. And so what I began to realize is not only to heal, not only was it about repatterning the mind and shifting the emotions, but it was also about amplifying them to be able to also create a shift in our consciousness. So we start to see and feel and perceive in a different way.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to learn, emotional regulation and emotional intelligence and kind of raise your kind of the average frequency of your emotions. Like, people are in that fear, or they're in survival mode, or they're in, lack, or what have you. And then we want to kind of just raise that average kind of emotional area where we're at. So we're closer to love and joy and gratitude and those things. We're kind of in that state more than in those higher states than lower, because that's going to determine your thoughts, and your thoughts can determine your physical and mental health, et cetera.
Absolutely. And so what's beautiful about it is when you shift your mindset. So a lot of times people are trying to think positive, and it doesn't become automatic. The problem is thinking positive feels a lot of effort. And if you shift your consciousness where you amplify positive emotions and you really radically feel differently, and you really radically reprogram your mind differently, it shifts your consciousness where it becomes easier. It's like when you fall in love with somebody, or you have this amazing feeling, you don't purposely say to yourself, well, let me only think positive, loving thoughts, and I'm going to really work on this. It's like your brain does that automatically. Or somebody who gets engaged and all of a sudden they're on cloud nine and they feel like all of these feelings. And it's just, and they experience that. It's like, okay, well, we can create that and create that shift to start moving the body to a place of healing, and also create a radical shift in our mindset.
So for anyone listening that really wants to detox their body, go to heavymetalsquiz.com. I created a quiz for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. Based on some lifestyle questions, you can get your toxicity score and get a free video series that answers all of your frequently asked questions about how to detox your body. Check it out, heavymetalsquiz.com. Yeah. And so how do we do that? How do we change our consciousness to kind of just click and just get into that better, higher emotional state naturally?
There's some really important insights for this. I would say one is what I call reverse emotional programming. And it's this. A lot of times whenever somebody has a negative emotion, what they tend to do is they tend to either try to get rid of the stress or address the stress, or look at the childhood programming for the stress and look at where did the pattern start, and, and the trauma and all of that. Now, the problem is that, of course, keeps them in the same consciousness. And so what happens is that you can get out of that. And I guess a simple way to think about it is like this, is that if I wanted to start speaking French, I wouldn't say to myself, well, I'm going to go get rid of all of the English I've ever spoken in my life and go and resolve all of that. That still would not get me to speak French. Instead, I would have to program French into my mind. And so similarly, people may say, well, I have had a pattern of feeling unloved or hurt or rejection or wounding or self-criticism. And so what happens is they try to get rid of all of the trauma or unloved or whatever it is. And they feel like by getting rid of the pattern of unloved or hurt, that suddenly they're going to feel extremely loved. But instead, we have to program that in. And so maybe a simpler way to say it is like this, is to give an example and say, let's say a woman was hurt by an ex, he cheated on her, he left, et cetera, and you say to her, well, just get over the emotions, just resolve it, let go of the hurt, let go of the negativity. Well, that's easy to say, but now let's say instead that she starts programming in her vision, and she says, okay, she starts seeing a relationship and feeling like she could really have one, and seeing that and starts seeing, that is possible, and starts feeling like that's really, really going to happen, seeing it, feeling it, embodying it, and really it feels like a reality to her. And then she says, okay, well, I'm going to then get rid of the negative. Let me heal that old wounding. It's much easier to get rid of the negative the more that we can move things forward first in a positive way. It's easier to then move things forward. And so that's why I call it reverse emotional programming or processing, is because it's really about processing emotions and going to the positive first.
And back to healing. So there's a lot of people listening that are looking for answers for pain or for their physical body, and they may have exhausted a lot of, physical solutions for that, like you had. And so what are some of the biggest kind of roadblocks to people or beliefs that they have or issues in people getting better and healing?
I would say this. I would say that it takes a real change. And I would say that most people fall short of making a real change and don't. And so I would say that that's a big thing. And I would say this, is that the mind has patterned ways of thinking and feeling. And I think probably even taking maybe we've been taking a step back to the bigger picture. So if we're going to really look at healing itself, if we go there for a moment, probably that's best to start, is to provide even more context and to say what I started to realize when I was going through looking at people with different illnesses and whatnot. We know that stress affects the body. What I started realizing is that, of course, different emotions affect the body differently. If somebody's embarrassed, their face turns red. Or panic attack. Somebody can have panic, or sexual thought creates a sexual physical response, different for men and women. But we can see that different emotions affect the body very differently. Or even there's the widowhood effect, where a senior can lose a spouse, and have a much higher rate of death for themselves after that loss. And even there's the feeling of, somebody being so scared, their heart skips a beat, or even scared to death, their heart stops. And so we can see that emotions can impact us even to the point of death. And so what I started to realize is exactly that, is that different emotions can affect us differently, is that just like embarrassment affects us different than panic, that affects us different than sexual emotion. And so part of getting results that many people are overlooking is they're not looking at what is the specific emotional pattern that's affecting them. And so something different that I did is I said, okay, what is that patterned way of thinking and feeling, and address that. And what I began to realize is part of the reason that we really need to get focused on the pattern is because, like, people might focus on a trauma. And if they focus on a trauma, while it's nice to be able to release and resolve trauma, that doesn't typically resolve the pattern, because there's usually patterns connected to trauma. And so it's bigger than just a trauma. It's a patterned way of thinking and feeling. So in other words, I had a quote unquote trauma, but it was connected to a pattern. So my trauma happened and it was linked to the pattern, but it wasn't all encompassing of the entire pattern. And so we have to get rid of the patterned ways of thinking and feeling. And so that's key. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine who I've been talking to her for quite some time about she has trouble sleeping, and she tried all these different things and marijuana and like the sleeping pills and just on and on and on. But when she talked, she always talked about fear and survival fear and, just always worrying, waking up in the middle of the night worrying. I mean, I think that's really the issue, is that survival fear that you're always in, and the things you're telling yourself. I think that's really why you're not sleeping. It wasn't these physical solutions, and I helped her make those connections and how to address that. But how does someone kind of identify and release these, and so they can get tangible results with mind-body healing?
What's tricky is that patterns can show up both in subtle ways, in major ways, and also in ways that can be humorous, but it can be the same way of thinking and feeling. For example, I've had people before who they may have a pattern of fear of abandonment or fear of rejection that is hurting them, that is affecting their health. And simultaneously, they may joke around on a purely joking basis where they say, oh my gosh, I better hurry up and get dressed and get ready to go, or my husband's going to leave me. Or leave without me. And they're joking completely. They don't say it with any seriousness in that case, like, oh, their husband's going to leave without them to the store or wherever. And yet that is part of the same patterned way of thinking and feeling that then can also have other instances where they're really upset and they go, oh gosh, is he really actually going to leave me? Because that patterned intensity. And so I would say that really becoming aware of the patterns that are at play is key, because when you do that, that's when you create radical results. And that's part of what I'm known for in my work, is that I've been able to take people continuously. So even after I healed myself, I've been able to take people under medical equipment, under thermal medical imaging, who are experiencing all types of pain and issues, and show them how to use their mind to release their pain. And you can literally see on the scan where the scan turns from red to green as their pain goes away, and in real time. And so, and kind of to give you more of a visual of that, if you think about somebody, let's say that they have neck pain. Well, on medical thermal imaging, that means their neck would show up all red on the scan, there where the heat is from the pain that's going on. And then so as I walk them through using their mind by addressing a specific emotion and helping them to then change that, you'll see the scan turn from red to green as their pain goes away. Now, of course, what I tell them, they say, okay, now you see that this is the pattern. Like, these are the patterns that you want to change. Now you've got to make sure to embody this change. If you go back into the negative, the problem will come back. And so that's what it's about. It's about really understanding what patterns and then creating a real shift.
Millions of people suffer every year from bone loss and fractures that could have been prevented. And as we age, the chances that this can happen only get bigger. And as much as you know, I love to talk about detoxing, I want to share with you another podcast that can help you learn how to naturally improve your bone density. It's called Happy Bones, Happy Life, hosted by my friend Margie Bissinger. And with over 200 episodes, the show has tons of practical nutrition, exercise, and supplement advice to help you naturally improve your bone density and overcome the challenges of osteoporosis. So if you're looking for the best advice on bone health for you or your loved one, just search for Happy Bones, Happy Life on whatever podcast platform that you are listening on to me now. Now back to the show. Yeah, well, tell us about that. Tell us about the thermography, the thermal imaging that you're doing, and how you're helping that to kind of guide people's minds to release their pain. That's so interesting.
The thermal imaging is amazing. Really, where that came in at is that after I healed myself, I thought people are going to think that I'm crazy, that I went from wheelchair, walker, cane, a mess, to healing myself, and now I can run and lift weights and I'm 100% healthy. Like, how is this possible? And I wanted to show people it's not just me. Like, we can all get results. And so I started, and people started asking me to speak. And so I started speaking and sharing. And I would take people from the audience who were experiencing pain, and I would show them how to release it. And then I thought to myself one day, I thought, somebody's going to think, well, that's a plant. That can't really happen. And that would have been me, by the way. I was world's biggest skeptic. I would have thought, there's no way. And it drove me to figure out how to show it under medical equipment. And so what I've done is I've taken people and then shown that exact thing where they have some type of pain in their body. And you can see it on the scan. And the simple way, if we break it down even more, is if you think about if you've ever had an infection or a sprained ankle or injury, and there's heat coming from it. And what happens is that any type of infection or heat or, any type of ailment that we have in the body can generate increased heat. And so what happens is that we put it under medical thermal imaging. That's a very high-tech version of sensing the heat from the body. And it can pick up on the pain. And so then just showing people how to use their mind, you can literally see the change happen. And so the great thing from that is you can see that it's not just mind over matter. It's not just saying, I'm just going to tell myself I'm healed. You actually see that there are physiological changes taking place. So that's one thing that's really incredible about it. Another thing is I've taken people who have I had some of my case studies published in a medical journal recently. And one of the people in the study had just come from a 10-day meditation and retreat. And I didn't know that when I worked with him. But after the fact, after his pain was a level 6, I helped him to use his mind to release it. You could see it on the scan. And he said, he goes, I can't believe that actually worked. I just came from a 10-day meditation retreat and a positive seminar before that. And so the point being is just to emphasize that it really is about identifying the specific emotions. That was key to getting results.
So talk to us about like some of the kind of the client or success stories or people that really kind of like stand out in your mind that you've worked with to do this type of work.
The ones that stand out in my mind, I mean, I've seen the most incredible changes. One of which is, like, let's say there's a woman that I worked with who had a tumor in her throat, and it was there for about 4 or 5 months. She tried everything she could to get rid of it, and it wasn't healing because she just did not want to have surgery. And so finally, she broke down and she scheduled her surgery, and she had another pre-op MRI, and it was about 5 millimeters, and you could see the tumor in her throat. It was protruding from her neck. So that was on Monday. She had the pre-op MRI, and her surgery was scheduled for Friday. And her and I worked on Thursday, and we worked for 1 hour, and afterwards she couldn't find the tumor.
Woo.
And she thought, oh, it just moved. I mean, this really couldn't work this quick and all of that. And so she showed up for surgery the next day, and they gave her the drugs and all that. She's like, well, just can you just double check really quickly, because I can't find it. And they're like, no, I'm sure it's there. And she's like, well, They just check. And the ENT came and they couldn't find it. And he said, they canceled the surgery. They said, we can't operate on something that's not there. I've never seen anything like this in my 30 years of practice. And so that I like quantifiable data, watching things that are there and then got, so that those are the types of things I've seen people go from bedridden to then, walking, running mini marathons, traveling. I mean, that's what we are all capable of is truly incredible.
Yes. And I think there's so much to be had in as far as healing is concerned and pain reduction with looking at releasing emotions and identifying emotional traumas and the patterns that you're talking about. And there's so many people I've met that I personally work with also that get astounding results releasing traumas or releasing emotional patterns and different ways of going about things. And it's just incredible. And certainly, like any emotions stuck in your throat, those are emotions that you have trouble expressing. Anything in the throat, that totally affects the thyroid too. Any kind of like emotions where you just can't express them.
There can be a combination, absolutely. So, like in her case, for example, and she did this video standing outside the hospital, which was really cool. She's in tears outside of the hospital. The tumor had just left, and in her case, that what she mentioned is she goes, telling a story of suffering, pain and suffering, it will affect you. And so hers was more so what she was, there were multiple things going on, but incredible what we're capable of. Well, incredible. Yeah. And And so I would say that in my experience, the throat can show up a variety of different ways is what yeah. So what's interesting, what I've found is also that, going through my injury, I started looking at it very objectively. And I could see that some people could have all kinds of traumas. For example, some people could have PTSD and not be sick. And so I started to look at it objectively and say, okay, well, wait a second. If stress affects the body and we know that, then how is it possible for people to have these severe traumas and not be extremely sick? You would think it would be black and white. Extreme trauma and extreme sickness. And then people who are happy, well, they must be healthy. And you could see that that's not true. And so what I began to realize is it's a certain combination of emotions is what I found in my work. And so kind of like this, somebody who is happy could also have underlying feelings of guilt for being happy or feeling like they're not allowed to. Or so there can be other patterns. And also thinking in terms of combinations, for example, an easy way I illustrate this is if you think about cake. If you think about somebody wants to make cake. If they have flour, they can't make cake. But if they have flour and they mix it with eggs and butter, vegan eggs and butter or so forth, and other ingredients, now they have cake. And point being, is it different ingredients create different recipes for different foods. And similarly, in our mindset, that it takes a combination, that we can have PTSD, and that doesn't mean we're going to get sick. But if we have a certain combination of emotions, that's when I have found that it creates an illness. And so that's why somebody with multiple personality disorder can have a personality who has no illness at all. And then another one that has a certain type of illness, and then a different personality that has a completely different type of illness. And it just depends on the type of combination of emotions is what I've found. And so for me, that's been the key for creating those changes.
Yeah. And tell us about your book. So you just had a book published, and tell us about that, what we can learn from your book.
What we can learn from it is a lot. So a few things, a lot of people, they think that energy of the body is just a spiritual notion and whatnot. But energy was actually discovered back in the 1920s. Alexander Gerswich discovered biophotons, that our bodies emit particles of light, right? And technically I said biophotons, but when he first discovered them, he called them mitogenetic radiation. And so basically what my book is it's the unfoldment of my injury. So I talk about my injury and then discovering, like, okay, well, I discovered the placebo, but then there's the open label placebo, but then there's multiple. So I walk you through how I figured out what I figured out, and energy, and how energy can actually, like, cellular proliferation. Biophotons can influence cellular proliferation. Cellular proliferation is, growth and repair and healing. And so basically I walk you through in the book, my research, what I figured out and how it works, and then how to then implement the process that I implemented to heal myself.
And what is the name of your book?
Master Your Mind and Energy to Heal Your Body.
Yes, yes. And what were some of your influences, say, when you were healing? What were some of the researchers and writers that really kind of helped guide you in your healing?
I love it. Great question. So many, I would say. So I geeked out on a lot of understanding how, so Alexander Gershwich, pop, I would say that also a lot of studies on post-surgical studies. So studies on optimism, or studies on psychoneuroimmunology, as far as patterns and understanding patterns and how the mind works as far as emotional patterns, Freud's work. So researching repetition compulsion or repetition compulsion reenactments, attachment theory. So understanding how emotional patterns can breed more of the same. I would say that was a huge thing. So there was different pieces at different times. A ton of medical journals. And then I would also say things like Maxwell Maltz. So he worked with the mind as far as the self-image. So he had a book, I think it was called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's from like Wendy will say the 1970s or 50s, or it was quite a while ago. But his was on self-image. And what I started to realize is understanding that, if a person has been ill for a long period of time, then illness can then be part of their self-image. They can start to see themselves as somebody who's sick. And so when I mentioned there was multiple different ingredients, it was really understanding, okay, well, repetition compulsion, emotions, okay, consciousness, okay, the medical journals of multiple personality disorder, okay, the self-image. So it was really about taking all of these pieces and bringing them together that has created the magic that has enabled me to show people how to get these radical results. Another one, Florence Scovel Shinn do you know who that is? She taught metaphysics. She was Louise Hay's, what do you call it? A role model, if you will.
Yes.
And so understanding, so, I mean, some basic things that she had said about health were just, if somebody is blind, then maybe, or has an issue with their eyes, then maybe there's something that they don't want to see. And so that way of thinking also helped me to understand a lot of the things that the body was saying. And so it's really a combination between understanding between science and spirituality, but understanding how it works. And I would say the reason that I've been able to get back-to-back-to-back results, demonstrate the back-to-back-to-back results, is because of developing a very grounded and understanding of the components that are needed.
Yeah. And so you talked about how maybe like meditation isn't enough, and just like, believing you're going to get better, or a visualization is not quite enough. What do people have to do beyond that to heal their bodies and overcome their health challenges?
You asked a great question, and a lot all in that one. So I'm like, there's so many ways to answer that. Probably one of the easiest is, during my injury, there was a moment where a friend, basically, her aunt was dying from lung cancer, and she came over to pick me up so I could go pay my respects before she passed. And when I got there, I paid my respects and said goodbye. And also, she had been laying and kind of in and out of consciousness for like 6 weeks. And I had this epiphany. Like, I remember seeing her, and I just had this awareness that was like, gosh, this is probably what I look like every day, because I had been spending hours upon hours with meditations and theta state and guided meditations and all of these things, just trying to stay in a deep relaxation of theta state or delta state, like just, and I thought, well, gosh, if this is so healing, then why hasn't she healed? And it just made me feel like, you have those moments where you feel like, God, like that was the moment. Like, she's been doing this for months and, and she wasn't healing. What do I need to do differently? And so I would say that deep relaxation can be great. And it was a coping mechanism for me. I could get my pain down at times, but it didn't change my life. It didn't heal me. It didn't give me the ability to run and get up and be pain-free and live that way. It wasn't until I really understood the patterning and then created that real change at a deeper level.
And so what is that key? What is that key to manifesting these changes in our life? And, and this can be, these things can be applied to anything, not just healing, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I would say there are keys. I would say that, you had mentioned also why is visualization. It's kind of like this. An easy way to illustrate this is all of the time I'll see people, maybe a woman who is working on wanting to be in a relationship. And so she's visualizing and picturing her perfect partner and who she wants to be with. And she's picturing that and picturing that. And it's not coming to fruition, but she's waiting for it and waiting for it. Or she's ending up with things that she doesn't want. And what we want to remember is that we have to really think about what our patterns are genuinely. It takes a genuine change. So, using the unfortunate example that a woman with an abusive father can leave him and find the abusive boyfriend, boss, spouse, et cetera, that pattern can continue all of the time when people go to create, visualize to create a change. It's like they're asking the universe for something, or they're trying to sugarcoat things or trying to create a new vision. But we have to have depth in that. Like, yes, we want to create a new vision. Yes, we want to feel it. Yes, we want to embrace it. And then also we need to look at what are the underlying patterns, what's real. We need to be real with what's real. And so I always say, it's not about checking out, it's about checking in. So we don't want to just pretend like things are fine. And yes, we want to think positive. Yes, we want to go beyond thinking positive. We want to program our minds for positivity, but then also genuinely repatterning our minds. So we're thinking and feeling in a different way. And we also have a different consciousness.
I love it. I want to read your book. That sounds so amazing because, there's a lot of stuff that I work on every single day and because it's a practice you have to cultivate, and just all the things that you've talked about. And there's key skills involved in that just sound like your book is just full of that. So I really thank you for coming on the show, and I highly recommend everyone go get your book. Tell us what the name is again and where we can get it.
It's Master Your Mind and Energy to Heal Your Body.
Okay, fantastic. And do you have a website or social media handles you want to give people?
Yeah, my website is brandygillmore.com, and Gillmore is with 2 L's. And what's great is actually on that website, you can see me working with somebody under thermography on a video, so you can actually see it happen. And I think it's just really cool to see that we all, it's not that I'm so amazing. Yes, I'm amazing, and we're all amazing. And that's what I really, from my heart, want everybody to see, is just how incredible we all really are.
Fantastic. Well, Brandy, thanks so much for coming on the show. And everyone, thanks so much for joining us for the Myers Detox podcast. I love doing this show every week and bringing you guys experts from around the world to help give you those clues to live your best life, because you deserve to feel good. And that's really why I do this show. So thanks for tuning in every week. And I was thrilled. We were podcast number 37 last week, and just really, really thrilled that I've been doing this for over 10 years and that so many more people are tuning in and getting the help and the answers they're searching for. So thanks so much.
The Myers Detox podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.